So one of the reasons I love this Easter gospel is because growing up, it's one we never heard because it's not part of the canon in the Catholic Sunday lectionary. Why are you weeping? It's a question worth reflecting on. We heard from Maureen and Terry that Carolyn Nelson, who was one of the original foundational members of this community of Mary Magdalene, who was always here early setting up, who still today is the person responsible for most of the fabrics that we use as altar cloths and decoration here, passed away. And those of us who knew and loved Carolyn, and you could not know her and not love her, are heartbroken as we remember the light that she emanated. Easter is not only about what happened to Jesus, it's about what's happening to us. I mean, look around our world. In the Holy Land this week, right, as Ramadan is celebrated and Passover is celebrated and Holy Week is celebrated, soldiers beat worshipers at a mosque in the Temple Mount section of Jerusalem. Fighter jets bomb Gaza. Fighting in Ukraine continues. We can go on talking about ongoing violence in Africa. Last night, 3 people shot in the food court at the Christiana Mall. Who among us has not eaten at a food court? We don't usually worry that we're going to get shot when we do that.
Jesus.
Even closer to Drexel Hill in Upper Darby earlier this week, 5-year-old twins, Eva and Ava Brown Williams, died in a fire in their home. Gun violence, health challenges, our reality, it's painful. Yet today, we're asked to integrate that and hold the tension of today's Easter message. Dazzling light, new life. How do we do that when all we want to do is cry? Right? We all have moments, right? Or is it just me? I want to give a shout out to Eric Clayton, who wrote an article that really shaped my reflection today. Eric suggests that Shrinking, the new Apple TV series, is a story about resurrection, rebirth, and new life, which makes it an Easter story. Is anyone familiar with Shrinking? Okay, I wasn't, but the article made me curious enough to watch it. So I watched the whole first season. I think there's only one season. So anyway, full disclosure, let's just say it's not your typical Easter movie, right? Jesus doesn't rise, and there's more than a touch of colorful language. The first episode opens with this character, Jimmy, blasting music, doing drugs, and swimming in a pool with sex workers. You might say, where's she going with this? Okay, but stay with me. The commotion wakes up the neighbors, and Liz, who lives next door, ends up confronting Jimmy in his backyard pool at 3 a.m. We ultimately learn that Jimmy's wife, Tia, died in a tragic sudden accident, and Jimmy has spent the last year numbing his grief. He hasn't been present to his teenage daughter, and he's avoiding his best friend. He's a therapist by trade. Yep, that's where the Shrinking name comes from. And Jimmy's grown frustrated, finds himself jaded as he tries to work with other people as they work through their pain. Yet it's clear that Jimmy can't hear his own advice, actually, or anyone else's, because his friends and his colleagues and his neighbors attempt to tell him and attempt to show him what he needs to do to muddle through his grief. And they point to his deteriorating relationship with his daughter, Alice, and they highlight the inappropriate behavior that he's demonstrated with his clients. But what makes shrinking an Easter story is the way that all the people around Jimmy help carry the weight that's dragging him down. And in the process, they make themselves vulnerable. In his article, Eric Clayton shares that he's heard it said that Jesus died as an individual and rose a community. And that through Jesus's death and resurrection, the church, the people of God, find themselves. And it's not easy. Mary Magdalene is alone and weeping in the garden. The apostles are locked away in the upper room. At least 2 folks are on the road to Emmaus. The journey expands from individual to communal. And just as Jimmy was in this series, in our gospel, Mary Magdalene was drowning in her own stuff, her own grief. She was lost, stumbling in the dark. The light of her teacher, Jesus, so brutally and suddenly extinguished. And then, surprise, the resurrection, a complete reordering of expectations and relationships. Hope returns. The risen Jesus brings people together. Then and now, Jesus walks with us and reminds us of the dazzling light resident within each of us. That's the light of the risen Christ that calls us to community, not just in a church situation, but it does make us church, and it helps us see more clearly the God who delights in us, who desires for us joy and peace and love. So, not to spoil for those who might want to watch this series, one of the final scenes of Shrinking's first season is a wedding. So the series that began in the sorrow of one man's lost love ends in the celebration of love and the commitment made by 2 others. And the joy is evident in the dancing and the singing, because the characters are no longer strangers to each other. They've come to realize that the best way to help yourself is to help others. And these resurrected people, far from perfect, are on the road together, helping one another carry the weight that previously dragged them down. The grief of death has been transformed into the joy of a people that come together. One thing that Shrinking does really effectively is showcase the multiple interdependent communities, professional, neighborhood, family, social, that each of us engage in. Perhaps the bottom line to living Easter every day can be summarized in the Mary Oliver poem, Sometimes, where she offers instructions for living a life. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. Ultimately, that's what Mary Magdalene did. Maybe each of us is called to do the same. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. Happy Easter.